Customs and Law, and now I'm joined by Mr. Burzine Waghmar, visiting fellow, Center for Iranian Studies. He's joining us straight from the UK. Thank you so much, Mr. Waghmar, for joining us and to discuss more on this, since you've been closely studying Iran. Well, to start with, to open the discussion, let's begin with the current situation in Iran, and if we compare it before the 1979 Islamic Revolution and the situation that unfolded after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, how would you assess the entire situation when we compare the two different contrasting ones?
Pre-1979 Pahlavi Iran was a progressive society, albeit run by a Middle East autocrat in the person of the Shah. But he was, for all purposes and intents, an extremely modernizing, progressive monarch, as was his father. And it has been a retrograde, obscurantist society, a self-styled Islamic republic after 1979. Your report correctly mentions all of the aspects which I concur with, including, may I point out, that a woman's word and witness is half the equivalent of a man's in testimony in a Sharia court. That's to say a Muslim woman, and it's even lower for non-Muslim women. And of course, that brings me to the point of what happened in 1979 after the Islamic Revolution. It is the male Shia Iranian, a 12er Shia Iranian who is first among equals as a citizen in Iran, followed by Shia women, and non-Muslims, men and women, count at the bottom of the rung in the scheme of things. Discrimination for employment and all other aspects of life. It is a discriminatory society. It has officially been so because it is a self-styled Islamic society. Mahsa Amini's death that we are just talking about now, might I point out that despite what the Prosecutor General in Tehran has capitally put out, that she had a cardiac arrest in the police station, that is patently untrue. She was beaten brutally, and she suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and stroke. That is what she succumbed to. And her father only finally received the corpse for final rites, and her father is on record having pointed out in the last 24 hours that he is not able to see his daughter's corpse in its entirety as lying out as a cadaver. He is only able to see her face and feet. He is not allowed to touch her. And he has been instructed by the security services and the intelligence, obviously, to keep a low profile on that. And that is what has happened. And he points out, contrary to the Prosecutor General's report, that she had ailments. He declares that his daughter was perfectly healthy in the last so many ensuing months. She had no problems, health problems at all. And now there's going to be a cover-up which will inevitably occur despite international pressure on Iran, because the security forces and the regime has always gotten away with it. And why is that so? Because Iran, just like China in Tiananmen Square 1989, has no problems in shooting its own population in cold blood, which is what it has been doing since protests started against the Islamic regime in July 1999. The student riots, from then on there have been these sporadic protests with clockwork regularity, coming down to what happened on 16th September. One more point to mention. Just last week, it may be coincidental, but it is instructive to point out. Just last week at the Samarkand summit, Premier Xi Jinping of China stated, we cannot have any more color revolutions in our region, and color revolutions must be avoided. Please note, I'm referring to a slew of color revolutions which have taken place across Central Asia, but also Iran after the questionable election of Mahsa Amini second term, the Green Revolution, the so-called Green Revolution of 2009. And of course, China looks on Iran as an ally in the region, and Iran, of course, supports China because both are anti-American in their outlook. And of course, since 2010, after that aborted Green Revolution, China has been consistently supplying Iranian security and intelligence services with more intrusive, all-pervasive surveillance technology, including what is called in cyber security as deep packet information technology. What do I mean by that? I imply that is China has given them software and ability to monitor and block internet traffic, but also to check on Iranians. For example, Deepika, if you were to log on to a blocked website sitting in Tehran, you couldn't access the website, correct? But the fact that you even pressed it on the keyboard, that website link, it will flag up and show where you are sitting. And so the authorities can immediately pinpoint and find out which part of Tehran or any other part of Iran you're sitting and can come after you. So that is what China has shared with Iran and needs to be pointed out. And Iranians know about this, and that's why you see these protests happening. And of course, there is a complete internet block, to say nothing of mobile phone services and also WhatsApp and Telegram services. And internet services, even before this protest, across Iran are notoriously slow because the regime always wants to clamp down on information getting to its population.
Absolutely.
I mean, cable television, satellite dishes are illegal in Iran, but of course every house has them on their rooftops. It's an open secret, if not an open joke. But of course, even prior to the digital revolution of the 2000s, people did have access to cable TV and watch what's coming in from the world, and could see as to what is happening and when they were cut off from the world as such.
Absolutely, Mr. Waghmar. You rightly pointed out, and you also mentioned about the technology, but the protest is continuously growing. We've seen the number of fatalities also. But before moving on to that, since you are closely studying Iran, first of all, tell us and help us understand how women are projected in Iran when we talk about theoretical projection of the country's outlook in the world.
Well, the Iran regime takes a traditional Islamic perspective based on Ayatollah Khomeini's doctrines and that of Shia clerics. And please note, I'm underscoring all the time Shia clerics because Shiaism is the state official religion, not Islam. Repeat, 12 Shia Islam. And Sunnis, Sufis and other Muslim groups, including non-12 Shia Ismaili groups, also do suffer discrimination, to say nothing of Jews, Christians and Zoroastrians in Iran. And of course, Baha'is in Iran, who like Ahmadis in Pakistan are considered beyond the pale and whose lives and property is completely forfeited. Killing a Baha'i gets you invites no prosecution in Iran because they are deemed as converts from Shiaism to Baha'ism, a 19th century religion. And of course, apostasy in Islam invites capital offense and death. So that is a given. And there are Baha'is still in Iran, not to mention abroad, who have suffered immensely after 1979. But suffering also extends, as I mentioned, to Sunnis in Iran's Balochistan province who complain about discrimination, Iran in Anatolian Khuzestan province, where we've seen demonstrations occur through the 2000s in these provinces too. So it is a very warped idea of having an Islamic Republic where only 12 Shias are, as I said, first among equals.
Right.
And women count for less in all aspects of life, not just testimony in a Sharia court, which I mentioned, but also for custody rights when it comes to divorce. It automatically devolves upon the father because male Islamic patriarchy carries the day and is as per custom and as per protocol and upheld by these clerical courts as such.
But Mr. Burzine Waghmar, the entire protest is erupting so that people can demand justice over there. But in a latest move, we heard that the president denied one of the interviews because he wanted the journalist to wear a hijab. What do you think? As per this, how can we provide justice, or how can people be assured of justice in the country?
Christiane Amanpour is a very senior CNN correspondent, and she politely declined to wear a scarf for President Raisi's interview, which was to take place in Manhattan. This was not in Iran, where you would expect guests to uphold local sanctities and customs, and, well, in Rome too, as the Romans do, as Iranian tourists who go to Iran, female tourists have to wear a scarf. Sushma Swaraj, as the late minister, never wore the scarf standing next to Foreign Minister Jawad Zarif in New Delhi. But of course, Indians, when they do travel to Iran or others, have to have a light scarf on. But in the case of Christiane Amanpour, she did not have to wear a scarf, and she rightly held her ground because she was politely and perfectly legitimately pointing out Islamic patriarchy and its entrenched norms that need not be exported abroad. You can do it in the Muslim Islamic setting, but for a male Muslim like is Ibrahim Raisi as a president and as a Shia cleric to demand that from a non-Muslim woman, and that too abroad, is really stretching it. And Christiana Amanpour spoke for everyone that we will not succumb. It is appeasement. That is the only way to talk about it. It is sheer appeasement to Muslim patriarchy, to obscurantist medieval mores and norms which have no place in the 21st century. It's just like what you have in an apartheid society, and which South Africa was pre-1994. And Iran practices an apartheid and is an apartheid society. It is a discriminatory society, and where discrimination is officially upheld in constitutionally speaking, but also in letter and spirit and norms of the law of the land.
Absolutely,
By observances.
Right. Absolutely, Mr. Waghmar. But US has already put sanctions. What more can be done to, first of all, A, stop the protest, and B, to ensure justice in Iran?
I'm afraid I don't see that happening, for the simple reason that in every instance, the regime has ridden out these protests since they clamped down so heavily. What do I mean? It is that the regime lawless, the Republican Guards, the Pasdaran or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, are the regime's foot soldiers, and the Basij Shia male volunteers who go out on motorcycles with iron chains, whipping men and women. They did this during the 2009 Green Movement, when protests occurred against Ahmadinejad's questionable election, and when he was ushered into office for the second time. They will do it again. They shoot their own population in cold blood, and Iran has always gotten away with it because there are entrenched elements, corrupt, entrenched, illegitimate elements who have run the show since 1979. What we are witnessing again today on your screen is just that completely illegitimate Islamic regime since 1979, which does not represent the population in the main. It only represents a certain section of the population who have benefited, who have monetized and weaponized their position since 1979 and enjoy this entrenched security and privileges, but the rest of the population doesn't. And of course, the ramifications of it are that we see what would political Islam hold out in the region at large. The Islamic Revolution was a disgraceful event in 1979 because since then, Khomeini wanted to export the revolution to other places. Bahrain had a near similar Shia coup in 1981, but it survived. He won 1987 Hajj riots in Saudi Arabia by Shia pilgrims. Ostensibly pilgrims were protesting and trying to export the revolution there.
Right.
Not to mention in Pakistan, where Zia had a very tough time with Pakistani Shias too. So Iran has been hell-bent on doing so, which has been contained in recent years. But then what do you have with the Revolutionary Guards who are creating chaos in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen? That is what we see playing out too, where Iran wants these proxy wars. And of course in Iraq, where Pakistan is to Afghanistan, Iran wants strategic depth and a client state in Iraq.
Okay, we leave it over there. Thank you so much, Mr. Burzine Waghmar, for joining us and bringing us a rounded perspective on the ongoing and current tensions in Iran over hijab rule. Well, that's all the time we have for now in the